Hello ladies and gents, Ollie here, welcome back to the channel. I'm a final year med student at the University of Warwick. Essentially what I'm here to talk about today is that this past weekend, The Times, one of the UK's oldest and largest, kind of most well-known newspapers, ran a feature on medical influencers and medics in the social media community, of which yours truly, I guess, was deemed to be one. But more than that, I'm here to spill the tea, as it were, as the phrase goes, on the state of kind of how all this came together, how medics kind of behave and exist on social media. There is, of course, no tea going to be spilled. I don't drink tea. I feel like if I did, I wouldn't spill it. And everyone featured is really nice. It's no comment on the individual people. But I just thought it would be interesting to go into kind of the experience of going and doing the photo shoot and talking about the interview that was done, because some of my words are in the attached article, what that was like and how I think they portrayed what we said and how they portray medicine, and then moving on to, as I say, thoughts about medicine and doctors and medical students and the relationship with social media. I'll put a splash screen or something across of this, but the headline here, Meet the MediCelebs, the doctors who are going viral. The place I want to start with this is with the title, Meet the MediCelebs, the doctors who are going viral. Bad, very bad title. It's very, very bad practice to label people as doctors when they are not doctors. Actually, Dr. Hanny here on the right is a real doctor. You should label as doctor, that is her title. Obviously, there are reasons why the Times editorial team chose to do that. It's because doctors is going to get far more clicks, far more attention than medical students. No one really gives a shit about medical students. But it's important that you also know that obviously none of us there had anything to do with that title, because we went down for the photo shoot. We were told the feature was going to be about medical students on social media. In terms of what the article itself was going to look like and what the title was and how it was all going to be laid out, that was obviously all done a long time after the photo shoot. So the next thing, other than me being Mike Wazowski'd out of the main lineup here, because there were 5 of us interviewed, 4 in the main lineup. Again, though, I understand, I've worked as a journalist before. For those of you who don't know, when I was in Newcastle, I've worked as a journalist for a few publications. And these sorts of decisions where you have to chop content or chop people out of lineups, that's really, really common in terms of when you're laying up these physical documents. And this is actually a really good segue into talking about the process of what actually went on, because I certainly didn't realise, even though I've worked in this sphere before, how much work actually goes into the behind the scenes side of things when you're producing professional level photos. Because again, if we return to this image, right, where you can see, as I say, 1 doctor and 3 medical students wearing streets, like stylish street clothes. So these are obviously not hospital clothes, and all of the clothes that we were wearing had been more or less picked out before we even turned up, before any of us turned up. I'll actually show you on screen now the streets that I was given to wear and was photographed in for some of it. Probably best that that monstrosity didn't see the light of day, my cow print shirt. Basically, all the clothing samples had already been picked out. The selection that was available was not actually that large. I guess these clothes were picked to try and capture a sort of trendy, young person, you know, type vibe. Completely not what I would normally wear at all, do believe me. And when we turned up, we were given these clothes. You had to go through full like hair makeup process, because everything was done to craft a picture to have you looking a particular way. And something else that it's really important to appreciate about this picture, in terms of what I mean, and I'll put the scan on screen for you, is that 1, we could not be all photographed together. We were all photographed at separate times, 1 at once in the studio. There was like a running order, so 1 person would turn up, maybe go and do their interview first and then do the photo shoot. Someone would be having their interview while someone else was having their hair and makeup done. Although it looks like everyone was sat together, that's actually not how it was at all. We were all photographed separately, and then for this lineup, the 4 people have been composited together to produce this particular layup. And you can kind of actually see it. If you look at the shadows, none of those shadows are real. They've all been done after the fact. And one of my favourite stylistic decisions, I just find this really, really amusing from having done this sort of Photoshop work myself, is that Sophie, in reality, here, is shorter than me. Nazir is much taller than me, but Obviously, if you put these guys in this lineup side by side, they look about the same height. So either what they've done is taken Sophie and stretched her in both dimensions, or they've taken Nazir and shrunk him in both dimensions, and I'm actually not sure which they've done. And in terms of the photo shoot, what they did is, I say, had us all separately. I think the photographer, who was really cool, by the way, Tom Jackson, really nice guy, they kind of had a series of poses in mind, I think, for each of us, or for us all generally to do. And you can see from the one they asked me to do quite how unusual or potentially awkward looking they are. It was just no smiling at any point, look directly at the camera and do any combination of strange and sultry looking poses. It was all pretty edgy, pretty moody. But the thing is, obviously, the quality of the photos themselves, the production value, speaks for itself. And I mean, you can't really complain about that. But now I want to talk about some of the things that are in the article itself, because that's obviously the kind of meat and potatoes of this thing. And rather than read the whole thing, which I'm sure would get me in legal trouble with the Times, I'm just going to pick up on kind of more about the things that I said, because I can't speak for the headspace of the other guys that were asked these questions. The article actually starts talking about Nazir's channel, Karma Medic, who has a really good channel. Go and check it out. It's very like study productivity focused. This actually starts with the theme of what I'm going to talk about later on in the interview, talking about brands who want to sponsor him. And it says here, like, ethical questions about whether medics should be paid to endorse freebies of red meat, and even BMWs have arrived since MediCelebs became a thing. But Nazir makes some really good points kind of immediately in the article about how he ethically approaches these sorts of brand deals. Essentially, these medfluencers have created virtual versions of Adam Kay's 2017 book, This Is Going to Hurt, Secret Diaries of a Junior Doctor, which sold more than 2 million copies. And it then makes some points about celebrity doctors who, you know, do public talks, appear on TV, fictional medics in shows like Grey's Anatomy and Scrubs, command, you know, attention of their own. Then it uses a quote from me. It says, these new young medical stars are keen to move away from fiction to real life. Ollie24 says 99% of the time it's not all crash calls and open surgery, which is obviously true. Most of what a medical student and what doctors do is relatively mundane, depending on, of course, your definition of mundane. If you're a cardiothoracic surgeon, for example, you're probably doing a lot of the same stuff, but it's not what most people would call mundane, I guess. Even as a 30-year-old millennial who's technically part of the new word, Georgina, who wrote this article, she makes the point, it's clear that these are the kind of people that we would want influencing us, as it were, or behaving as influencer, except for Tash Binney, who likes the idea of being a TV doctor. None of them says they're seeking fame. I think that's a bit unfair to Tash. I wasn't asked that question. Do I personally want to be a TV doctor? I guess I'd appear if someone asked me when I was a doctor, but I don't want a career as a TV doctor, if that makes sense. Their main motivation for taking social media is to help students pass exams and win a place to study medicine, which they all say is incredibly competitive, and it's about humanising doctors. Absolutely true, at least in my own case. Then there's a good amount of space dedicated to Tash's experience with mental health conditions. I just did an interview with Tash, which went live, in fact, 2 days ago, so I really recommend going and watching that if you want to learn more about her experience. But that really does show the power of having these online platforms, and she says about having other doctors reaching out to her who are worried about having problems with the GMC and with their registration and stuff like that. That's really good. I'm pleased that that stayed in the article. And just point of information, guys, you might find interesting. Each of these interviews that were done took about 45 minutes, I think, with each of us. So you can imagine that they've got hours of interview content to try and get into a two-page article. So I'm actually really pleased that they left so much space dedicated to that. That's one of the really important things that should be left in an article like this. So then it talks about Sophie's experiences. So Sophie's due to start on the Birmingham graduate entry program. It talks about similar things. So CBT, work-life balance, anxiety, mental health awareness, you know, insight into medicine, that kind of thing. She says, I think we're moving away from the idea that doctors must have a hard exterior. This is a real glimpse behind the scenes of what it's actually like. Again, that highlights very well, I think, the power of medic social media. I think we have a lot of problems to deal with in this regard, in that applicants to medicine often don't know what the reality of it is going to be like. I certainly didn't, even applying when I was slightly older, and neither do the general public, really. I think the general public are a bit more aware that it's less glam and less glitzy than perhaps applicants to medicine are. but they still don't understand a lot of what being a medical student and then what being a doctor is ultimately going to be about. And social media, particularly when it acts as a diary, as Sophie says, is a really powerful way of capturing that and giving that insight. And then the bit where it talks about my experiences, which I think was spun a little more negatively than I kind of meant it to be. And it uses a quote of mine, which was kind of taken a little bit out of context, but again, journalism. I've had much more negativity than positivity from other medics about becoming a doctor, he admits, and there are very many reasons for that. Again, I think this was kind of chopped from two separate paragraphs that I said. Specifically, I don't think I said much more negativity. I think I said it was about half and half, or at least I hope that's what I said, because that is about what it is. I think what I was trying to get across was you do get a lot of negativity from other medics, particularly senior doctors. I can't speak for other people's experience, but I genuinely do get told fairly frequently, you know, you don't have to stay in medicine. There are other things you can do which will kind of ruin your life less. Maybe they're just giving me hints that I'm going to be a shit doctor. Just an interesting thing. Again, it's presented as Sophie agrees. You know, I've been told if there's anything else you want to do it. We obviously didn't do our interviews together. So I find that interesting how they presented that. But she makes a good point, and then uses another quote from something I said, which is, the NHS is burnt out, which I think it is. It's so chaotic even at the best of times, which I think it is. Now, having worked within it as an actual employee, I still felt the same way, even as an employee, as I do as a student. It is very chaotic. And that's not to say for a second that that's necessarily a bad thing. Running the NHS must be insanely complicated because it deals with humans, and humans are really hard. It is tough, but the NHS still runs, and I don't envisage leaving it, and that very accurately captures my feelings about the NHS. It continues to creak along and to get by. It is a dysfunctional organisation, seemingly at most levels, but it continues to work. It continues to provide world-class, world-leading care, whatever the state of it is, and you can't really get away from that. He wants to become a consultant neurosurgeon, he thinks, like his medical hero Henry Marsh, whose 2014 memoir, Do No Harm, Stories of Life, Death and Brain Surgery, sold more than 250,000 copies. And again, it uses an experience that I spoke about, which is genuinely true. He shook so much when he met Marsh at a book signing that the author had to take his well-thumbed grisly copy out of Burton's hands to scribble in it. That's absolutely true. I was like doing this with the book, you know, when you meet your heroes, and he physically like had to take it off me and open it to the right page. Burton has also met Adam Kay, describing him as lovely, as genuine as he is in the book. Again, absolutely true. For those of you who don't know, I was lucky enough to meet Adam when he came to do a talk at Warwick Medical School. We'd kind of been speaking a bit on Twitter because I was just starting and kind of in that really excited to start. So he gave me some really good advice, sent me a book plate for my copy of his book because I didn't have a signed one at that point. We went for a drink in the crappy student bar at Warwick, and he got me 2 free tickets to his show that night at the Arts Centre, and I took my housemate, so he's genuinely wonderful guy. 10 out of 10, would meet popular medical authors again. Then it talks about Hanny's experience, and apologies to Hanny. Hanny I did not know anything about before this interview, but I think, as it says in the article, it's because of how new, but how crazy successful her channel and her platform has kind of become in the last month or so, and I'd really like to collaborate with Hanny at some point in the future. As a second-generation immigrant, both of her parents are from Somalia, born in London. She wanted to be a doctor partly because she didn't see doctors that looked like her growing up. This is really powerful and really important, and it's one of the single most important lessons that I've taken away from doing the mock interviews that I've done with you guys and doing the outreach work. Having people in positions of privilege and positions of power is an enormous driver, and if you don't have those, it can have a really negative effect on people, particularly if you're wanting to widen participation into a profession like medicine. Her videos explore her experiences as a young female Muslim doctor. Again, really important that we get those insights, because I can post until the end of time about my own experiences. Those experiences capture pretty well, I hope, the experiences of a straight white guy going through the medical training system, and they don't accurately capture the experience of other people. I'm surprised Hanny went into this as well, but it's it's really good to talk about. YouTube is about to monetize her channel. It's £4 per 1,000 views. That's about right, actually, CPM wise. I believe in discussing money openly in order to not allow pay disparity. Sure, agree with that. Going straight on to a geriatric respiratory ward during COVID-19, Jesus Christ. She says it's very intense and a bad time to start, but we're aware of how much worse it is for the patients. Again, really good point. And it ends with a point about local heroes that I made during the interview. Burton believes finding a local hero in your hospital and thinking, I want to be like you, is more inspiring for potential medical students than any fictional portrayal. And it makes a counterpoint about medic celebrities, but that's also, I think, really important and something that I do stand by. Because just like what I said before about seeing people who are in a position that you would like to be in or aspire to be in is really important, even if, necessarily they don't look like you. The relationship that I first had with someone was actually I think she was an ST2 neurosurgery trainee who I just kind of became aware of at the hospital in my second year. I was turning up to the neurosurgery teaching every week, as they kind of said you had to do if you want to get in with the neurosurgeons and get into theatre. And I was turning up every week trying to show that I was interested. And she's a brown-skinned Indian trainee who actually kind of took me under her wing a little bit and was like, look, you're clearly interested. Come to the hospital on Sunday. We're doing a spine list. You can come and watch, and then we can get you in with the surgeons, get you in theatre, scrubbed in and stuff. And that was a moment for me where I was like, actually, we don't really have anything in common, either culturally or experience-wise, other than obviously clearly this shared interest in neurosurgery. And again, she's already been successful in getting her training number for neurosurgery, which is crazy competitive. But more what I admired about her, and continue to admire, is that she was willing to kind of go out of her way to take that first step and say, let's do something for this random guy that I don't know. And that is actually the thing that I found the most inspiring. Right, so relatively quickly, I want to talk about the relationship of medical students, doctors, and social media. Because one of the questions that I was asked in the interview was, do you consider yourself an influencer? Do you want to be an influencer? And that didn't make it through to the article, obviously. Do I consider myself an influencer? That depends very much on the definition of influencer. Do you consider yourself an influencer? If you mean, do I want to get people to spend their money in a certain way, buy certain products, or go and do certain things? No, not really. If you mean influence in the way of, do you want to change people's thought processes in a particular way, or offer them new ideas that they maybe haven't thought about before, then yes. If that's what being an influencer means, then that's the type of influencer that I would like to be. But the second part of that is that I only want to be an influencer in things that I have license to talk about, which is the next thing that I want to talk about, where I think I can offer some sort of valid, constructive idea. And if that influence is going to be positive and helpful in the setting in which it's intended to be received. So as many of you know, my platform, the Postgrad Medic platform, which I'm actually now in the middle of rebranding as it happens, the reason I set it up was intended to widen participation in medicine. That was the single issue, and that still is the majority of the work that I do. Since I launched, it has now evolved into lots of other things. I've discovered that I really like medical education, doing outreach and interviews with you guys and with doctors and about giving insight into medicine, which I consider to be different than pure widening participation, but it was mostly the interview stuff. So the idea was that if I can put those ideas out there, make them freely accessible, while still conveying that I am not an expert in the topic and don't want to portray myself as such, because I'm not, but if I can present myself in as honest and open a way as possible, capture some of my med school life and show what it's actually like, to give people a realistic view of what coming and studying medicine is like, so they can make that decision, particularly as a graduate, where you're actually giving up quite a lot to go and study medicine, then I hope I can achieve that too, and answer your guys' questions and interact with you guys, and I love doing that. That, I think, raises the question about whether celebrities or medfluencers, which is such disgustingly cringe terms, but do they have different responsibilities or some of the same responsibilities as your typical Instagram or social media influencer? And I hesitate to use the word typical because we're all typical, we're all average, it's just that we do different things. yes, I think we probably do have different responsibilities because of the way the public perceives doctors and medical students, in that they are experts on health, when it is the case, as many of you know, that most doctors are not actually experts on anything, because doctors by and large are generalists, except obviously if you're training in a specialty, in which case you probably know much more than even the average doctor about your specialty. This is also one of the areas where it can get kind of murky, because doctors actually receive very little training in certain areas, two that jump out at me being nutrition and mental health. Just because someone is a medical doctor, it doesn't necessarily give them much license to talk about these things as experts, even though they may be people who have an interest in these things or have done extra training in these things. The average medical curriculum doesn't actually give you that much of these things. I really enjoy teaching, absolutely love it, want it to be a big part of my career. I hope to work as a clinical fellow at some point in my career, a clinical teaching fellow. But what you have to understand, obviously, is that if I teach something, either to my fellow medical students or to you guys, that's not done from a medical expert position. That's done as more of a science communication exercise. I could, for example, draw you out some bony anatomy, or the circle of Willis, the cerebral arterial circle that gives rise to the vessels that supply the brain. But, you know, I'm not a trained neurologist, I'm not a neurosurgeon, I don't know that much more about the brain than any other medical student. But because I've memorized that small snippet for the purposes of doing an educational piece, that's how I'm able to present it, and that's the lens through which it needs to be viewed. But the problem is that if you take that out of context, someone might misinterpret it as medical advice, particularly if you're talking about the side effects of drugs, or if I said ibuprofen is a great painkiller for X condition. You know, that might be an evidence-based statement, that might be according to NICE guidelines, but the risk obviously is that because I present myself as being knowledgeable in that situation, that someone who doesn't know that I'm a medical student interprets it as medical advice. Well, my other light has decided to die, so we're doing without that now. But the other side of this is widening participation in medicine. You've got to be really careful, all you applicants out there, with medical students and doctors who portray themselves as experts in admissions to medical school, particularly those that try and sell you a course or a book or something like that. Because as far as I can tell, the only way to actually become an expert in medical admissions is to work for a medical school that is currently taking medical students, you know, in selection process, and that raises a load of ethical questions. By and large, most of the people who claim to be experts will have gone through the process once and been successful at the UKCAT once, and have gone through the interview process once successfully. And that's the same for me. In my own case, where I like to think that more of the, not expertise, but experience comes from, is having done now over 200 mock interviews with you guys who are applying. And remember, this is all for free, so I've got nothing to kind of gain by telling you this, is that at least I know the common mistakes or the common things that people say that don't sound good to me as a critical assessor, and I know the things that good candidates tend to say. And this publication that I've got coming out for this application cycle on kind of approaches to your medical interview is based around those experiences. And all of this comes down to the ultimate point I want to leave you with. It's really important to label yourself appropriately, I think, on social media. So I think some things that kind of irk me personally about things that people do, when people put doctor in their social media handles when they are not doctors, I think I understand why people do it, and I know it's not intended in a bad way, but we know that there is a risk that people will misinterpret you as being an actual medical doctor, and that's not a risk that I would run. I also think it can be helpful to label where in your training you are, if you say you're a medical student, because patients, I think, do actually have more understanding of what that means than you'd think. If you say you're a first year student compared to saying I'm a final year student, patients, particularly those who have dealt with hospitals before, actually might have more of an expectation about what you do and don't know than you think they do. So I think a sensible practice might be, if you're waiting to start medical school, label yourself as not having started yet. If you're a first year, label yourself as a first year. If you're a finalist, label yourself as a finalist. I think having that granularity is probably a good idea. And I mean that purely in a protective way, not just for yourself, but for other people. I think it can be helpful. Right, that's where I'm gonna end this, guys. It's just been a really, really long, obviously, rant about social media at this point. But do let me know your thoughts. If you've got any questions about anything that I've said in this video and somehow you've made it this long, do let me know, but otherwise that's where I'll cut it. Peace, see you next time. Thanks for watching, guys. There are 3 ways you can support the channel. The first one is to like, comment, subscribe, share this video with a friend. Just enjoy it generally. Second, you can buy me a coffee if you found it useful using my Ko-fi link, which will help keep me awake during the editing process. And then thirdly, you can use my referral link to save 10% off your first year of Complete Anatomy 2020, my favourite 3D anatomy learning tool. Take care, guys, and I'll see you next time.